Welcome to Living in Harmony, a podcast for Christian parents who want to make the peace in their household without sacrificing their sanity. Here, we talk about everything from sibling rivalry to dating and how to raise your kids to be strong in their faith while maintaining your own. But don't worry, we're not all preachy here. That's the purpose of your church and your pastor. Here, we're here for you, to help you know you are not alone in this crazy journey called parenthood. So whether you're a seasoned pro or a brand new parent, Living in Harmony, this is the podcast for you. So grab some coffee or wine, we won't judge, and join us as we navigate the ups and downs of raising kids in a Christian household where the gospel is the center. Hello and welcome back to Living in Harmony. If you're listening in real time, then your air conditioner is probably running. My name is Delmar.
I'm Robert.
And I'm April.
And it is hot outside.
Yes, it is.
But we got the air on in here. It's real nice. And it's good to have you back. Like I said, if it is your first time, welcome to the show. We hope that it adds value to your life. If you're returning and if you're someone who's given us all the topics and contents and you've given us feedback, thank you for that. We want to encourage you to keep doing that. But today, we're going to jump right into a conversation because the conversation in church right now is, what if you prayed about it? And I mean, how many times has that thought just, life happens, start stressing out? I know right now, y'all got like a rogue chicken harem at your house trying to kill your rooster, correct?
We have some rude hens.
The problems of being self-sufficient.
Yes.
But things happen, and once life, it seems like sometimes we look at prayer as our last line of defense, and where it should be our first. And how many times is, what have you prayed about it? What if you did? And then I think a next logical question that comes is, okay, so I did pray about it, and it got bad. It didn't get better. I've heard people use this as their own personal apologetic to not believe in a higher power, to which I would gently say, if my predication for my parents being real is that they answered my prayer or my request for every time, then I would not have parents. But sometimes, let's just be honest, tragedy happens. It just makes no sense to us. And we're leaning into what happens when he says no to our plan, to our, prayer. And today we really want to just lean in as a family conversation and say, okay, so the no is going to happen. Tragedy is going to happen in our family. Chances are now, if you're listening, you've already had to walk through your family with some tragedy. So we're going to talk about that today. How do we walk through tragedy together, through hard times, through difficulties, things that us as parents, we have not even a right answer when your kid says, why? Like, what do we do? So I throw that out there as chum in the water and say, have y'all had to navigate this? And just as we enter this conversation, where do you start to ease into the waters as parents with children who maybe the conversation's too advanced for them to answer the tragedy if they're real young, or if they're older, maybe the conversation is more philosophical and then we feel unequipped. So where would we start with this, you guys?
I mean, we've been really blessed. I mean, God has protected our family through a lot of things. We haven't had to deal with, especially when our kids were small, we didn't have to deal with tragedy with small kids. And so that was nice to not have to address this. But I think when you look at it, just understanding that however we approach this, our feelings are not the standard for truth, right? Mm-hmm. We've got to think about, remembering that God's truth is true, whether we feel like that or not. It's easy to go back and find places in, especially the Psalms where the feelings are pretty raw in there. And if you were to look at those and say, well, okay, that's that feeling that David was having, or that feeling that this person was having, that feeling that Jesus was having on the cross, right? Those feelings are the ultimate authority. That's something that we need to guard against, because the feeling comes, the feeling goes. It's not something that is that needs to be what we hang our lives on.
Correct.
Yeah, but I think along with that, we, rather than focus on our feelings, we focus on faith and our hope in Christ and our peace we can rest in on, the sovereignty of God, that regardless of what we are walking through, we can rest in peace, even in the hardest of times, of knowing that God's ways are perfect and we're not promised an easy road. And sometimes, real tragedy can hit, but none of it takes God by surprise, even though it sometimes takes us by surprise. But God's ways are perfect, and ultimately, our highest desire should be for His glory, even though sometimes that doesn't pan out the way we would like to see it pan out.
Absolutely. Just this past week, we were talking before the podcast. A good friend of mine, they had a death in the family. There was a stillborn, full term, was not supposed to happen. A day early, there was kicking, And when you show up, there's the why, there's the hurt, which we're going to get into. But this child's father released a statement and actually read it at the funeral. And it basically summed up in, I don't know. And I think that's very okay in tragedy. I don't know, because I don't know the will of God. Ultimately, I'm not sovereign. But where he hung it is, all I know is that my child's not going to have to face the hurt in this world. Not going to have to face the current climate of culture that is so bad. My child went straight to be with Jesus. And I'm sitting here, and in tragedy, I think the first thing we would lean in, if you're like jotting stuff down even, is that our faith has to be our foundation, because when God's answer is no, or when we see chaos, I would rather have his no than the chaos of nothing, because there's no way to make sense. It's just random everything. And some people will say, well, that's your argument for God being, he's your crutch. I would say, no, he's the explanation. A crutch is saying, I don't need an explanation. I'm just going to move on with life. Everything goes to chaos. I'm just going to put my head down and move. That can, in its own way, be a crutch. But when we have this faith as a foundation, and we know that there is a sovereign mover higher than us, it really does help us understand that we don't always have to understand. And I've sat down with countless teens. Parents go through divorce. We prayed with them beforehand that wouldn't happen. Losing loved ones. For some children, their first tragedy is their pet dying. Right? That's a real thing. It's a real thing for a lot of adults. So when we go into that, it's completely okay to tell your child, I don't know. You don't have to be the arbiter of knowledge in your house. And if we do try to say we know, how does that work out?
Yeah, and I think the illustration you just used about that's just a crutch. Well, okay, but when I'm injured, I need a crutch, right? If I've sprained my ankle, if I've broken my leg, I need a crutch to move around during that time. And in these times, we are broken people. We're sinful people in all times, and in this time of tragedy, I'm doubly broken, right? Mm. Something has happened that has caused me an injury. I need a crutch. I need something to help me, recover. Now, the crutch, in the physical world is temporary. I have it for a few weeks, a month, whatever it is, until I can get my strength back. And I think that's a very appropriate illustration. To be able to cling to God's truth in that sense, and say, I don't know why, but God, you're still there. Mm-hmm. I was flipping through a couple of Psalms as we were prepping for this, and Psalm 22, the one that Jesus quoted from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Verse 2, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. But the very next verse, yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel, and you, our fathers, trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. And so he goes, the psalmist there goes straight from, God, you're not answering me, but you're holy, and I know that you are still worth worshiping. And I think that's the attitude to have, that the emotion is real, it's raw, the injury is real, but we can still rest on that the character of God and his truth and who he is.
Absolutely. And I really like the way you frame that. Like, don't let someone say the crutch is the insult. I know that oftentimes when it's wielded at you, it is, but in reality, a crutch is necessary for healing. And the beautiful thing about the crutch is it's also the source of the healing here. It is the source of where we can move. I will say one thing. I was talking to a lady the other day. She was like in her 70s. And I think she lost like 5 people in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Like ranging from sisters to children. And I just asked her, I said, I bring nothing to this right now. I have not experienced. I said, but can I ask you a question? Like, as someone who has years of, being a child of God in your life, and you're going through this, what's some advice you can give to Christians? And I loved her response. Her response is, oftentimes Christians, we tend to like throw it up there in theology so fast. And we throw it up there in we'll meet again so fast that we never actually mourn. That we never actually say, this really, really stinks that this thing happened. Or if it's not a loss, God, when he closes a window, he opens a door. My thought on that is we'll try telling that to the people who are on the other side of the ark. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's not true. But we tend to put these little, sayings in our head. And I really liked it. She goes, you need to sit in it. And that's another thing that we were chewing around before the cast today is, as parents, when we speak to our kids, we want to encourage you to give them freedom to feel. Yeah. Kind of like if you break your leg and you couldn't feel it, or cut your arm and you're bleeding and you couldn't feel, how would you get healing? You have to initially feel so you can heal. And your feelings are actually really good indicators, and it's an indicator that, hey, here is a place where there's something you and the Lord need to work out, some intimacy you can gain through being with him. But embracing the emotions, and sometimes the emotions is anger. In those same Psalms, there's anger, but it can be a tendency as a parent to be like, just suck it up and move
Stiff
on.
upper lip.
Yeah,
As the British say.
yeah. And in our culture, we don't show our emotions because that makes us weak. That kind of goes antithetical to Scripture. So like creating that safe place in your house, that conversation where we need to talk through this, we need to process this together.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those places where the culture has gone one direction and the church has gone another, maybe for good reason, because the culture is saying your feelings are, you need to validate your feelings and essentially worship your feelings. And that is, what you feel is everything. If you feel something that's different than your biology, you trust it. If you feel something that's different than what you see with your eyes, you trust it. That's what you go with. And so the church has kind of gone the opposite direction. But I think part of that, we've kind of gone too far in some sense. We don't allow ourselves to feel. And we think, okay, because God has this, under control, that means that I don't have the space to show that I'm upset by it, because I need to be resting in God's promise. And we go, like you said, we try to go straight to that theology, and that's just, most of us can't do that most of the time.
Man, that's so insightful, because the culture nurtures us right now. Take your feelings, and your feelings are what is reality. Whereas when we see in Scripture, where do those who do it well do? They take their feelings to reality. They take them to the Lord. Instead of saying my feelings are reality, they take their feelings to reality, and that helps them sort through it. And we all know that, if someone comes to you and says this tragedy happened, and you say, well, the Lord is good, and you're just not looking like, okay, that's reality. But, there's a temperament that comes through. God gave us a heart to work through things and compassion to have. So being able to lean into our children and allow that safe space to happen. And for some things, it might be so big, maybe they need to go talk to their pastor with you. And I will tell you, this is a good little plug for family ministry. Someone was asking me the other day, what's the difference between youth ministry and family ministry? And I think that's a good question. it's a really good question. First of all, family ministry has been around forever. That's how churches began, was in families. But I'll say just a real tangible way. In youth ministry, this is generally how it goes, or kids ministry, pick your modern day, age-specific ministry. Family goes through a tragedy. Family tries to deal with it on their own. Family gets overwhelmed. Family calls pastor. In family ministry is family goes through tragedy, pastor shows up. It's not, we get to the end of the line, we're at the end of this. It's no, pastor shows up, he's here with you. So that way, when things are spiraling out of control, that you have some support system with you right there. And that's one of the things that we also would encourage if you to move through tragedy, to move through that without community. First of all, it's unbiblical.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it's unbiblical is because it's unwise, because that's not how God created us. He created us to be in community. And being in community is so exponentially important. Because I'm sure that you've had times where if you didn't have community, you would have been bottomed out.
Yeah.
I know I did. Today I sent y'all a text. It's 1 year since I had to step out of a different role in my life. And that for me and my family was a form of tragedy. But the day before I stepped out, y'all came to the house, sat on the couch with me and a couple other friends, and we prayed together. I don't know if I could have navigated those waters on my own, because some of the advice that you gave me of how to do this, I might have not would have been as courageous or done the thing, because I have community, and community fosters courage. It fosters understanding. It fosters just a healthy place for us to process what's going on. Because here's the thing, parent, if you're not getting your child in that community, they're going to find that community.
Find it somewhere.
And where are they finding that community today?
They're going to find it on Reddit. They're going to find it online someplace. Yeah.
They're going to find it on TikTok.
Yep.
For me, I'm on VR a lot. Honestly, VR, especially the social spaces, it's just people seeking community, which is so ironic that people go in there to disprove God while at the meantime fully expressing their Imago Dei by seeking community. But they do. So if we're not being proactive about making sure that our children are in a community, not just one that is a place where they can feel safe expressing themselves, but that what comes back to them is biblically sound. Right. And that is, that has to do a lot with being involved in the church space they're in. There's a lot of it's real easy to be like, well, wherever my child is happy at church, that's where I'm going to go. And I've experienced this a lot, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's true to an extent, but also it's like, where's the church that is best for our family?
Right.
So, have any of y'all ever had to walk with I'm sure y'all have had to walk with students through tragedy. Y'all have served quite some time in student ministry in your lives. Like, how vital have you seen that community be in your own worlds?
Yeah.
I think that community is very important. And one of the things that I know that I had to learn along the way is I like to be a fixer and I like to be a problem solver. And I also know a lot of times a lot of men like to be fixers, problem solvers. And so one of the things that I've had to learn along the years is that no one should have to walk through tragedy alone, but that doesn't mean we always have all the right answers, or we don't have the answer to say that makes everything, better. Sometimes you don't even have the words to say. Right. I just want to encourage, when you find yourself as the person that is helping to walk someone through it, sometimes it's okay to sit down with that person and just say, I love you, and I am so sorry you're going through this, and I wish, I don't know how, I can't make it stop, but I'm here with you. You don't have to walk through it alone, and I'm here for you, whatever you need. And sometimes that's what someone needs to hear, there have been times we've gone through a few things, times of uncertainty here and there, throughout, our lifetime together. And, I remember a time when I was very nervous and anxious about some uncertainty ahead that was that we were dealing with. And what I really needed to hear from my fellow believers was, we're here for you, whatever you need. You don't have to walk through this alone. And unfortunately, what I often heard instead was very perky replies of, God has all this under control. It's going to be okay. And in my moment of not being able to see past my fear at the time, that wasn't what I needed to hear.
Yeah, that refrigerator magnet theology just didn't cut it. And that doesn't mean that those refrigerator magnets aren't true. It's just that sometimes that's not the space I'm in right now, and that I can't receive that in that emotional state that I'm in.
But it goes back to community and the fact that you're not meant to walk through life alone. Right. And you're not meant to have to weather everything alone. And that whole community, especially your brothers and sisters in Christ, I think sometimes the most important thing when you're helping someone through tragedy is they need to know they don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, the ministry of presence is huge.
It is.
And, just think scripturally through this, we look at Job, lost his whole everything, money, health, family. His friends showed up. And when they first show up, we're like, this is biblical. They just sit with him and don't say anything. But the whole book takes a turn the second his friends open his mouth.
I was about to say, yes.
Yep. There's a level where you can make suffering worse. And I do think we do make suffering worse by offering. What
sin did you have that you must have done to bring this on?
No, seriously, yes. And sometimes, that's why bad things happen. But sometimes it's because we don't know.
Right.
And I think one of the worst ones I hear a lot is, well, you just need to have more faith.
Yeah.
I've sat down in front of people where this is not going to work out well. I tell them to have more faith, that's the key to unlocking your next blessing. I've just made God a liar by saying you just got to have more. That's not true. Sometimes the tragedy is there. In Corinthians 12, Paul prays 3 times for God to remove this thorn in his flesh. And God's answer is no. That's part of who you're going to be. You have to have it. It's not sometimes, it's not that God shuts a window, he opens a door. Sometimes he just shuts it. He just shuts it. He's like, this is your defining thing in how I'm going to grow empathy in you, how I'm going to humble you, how I'm going to help you be more compassionate, which humility, empathy, compassion, perseverance, all of those things cannot exist if there was not brokenness in the world.
Right.
The ability to, the greatest love is that someone should lay down their life for a friend. That's Christ. We couldn't know the greatest form of love unless sin was in the world. That's just a reality.
There's a need for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you think you talk about Job, he's not the only example of suffering that you have. Talked about the Psalms earlier. David had a lot of suffering in his life. Both before we tend to focus on what happened before he became king, but then his son rebelled against him, and now he's on the run, and there's this civil war going on, and he had a lot of suffering after that. There are other figures throughout. There's all kinds of suffering in Scripture because it's about real people who were living real lives, and so these are things that happened to them. And I think when you look at those, sometimes they suffered well, sometimes they didn't suffer well, right? But I think you can go back and look at that, and you can say, here is someone who suffers well, or here is someone who is in something, Job, not his fault, right? Clearly, explicitly, not his fault that happened to him, and yet that was part of his sanctification and ours to be able to give us that example. That he went through, and I think those are things that we can clearly look at.
And when you get to the end of the book of Job, what I find interesting is he never finds out. Yeah. He doesn't know the backstory.
He never gets that story.
He never understands why that suffering happened until he died. And when we're walking through with our families through a hard place, our families may never know. We just may not. And, we could take that and go to a real nihilistic place. Or we could take that and we can say, but we do know that there's one who does.
Right.
And we know that he's working all things together for his glory, And when I think about that, I think about what does it mean for God to receive glory? Because we look at the suffering part of it, and in our suffering, he comforts us. In our suffering, he gives us peace. In our suffering, he brings about the characteristics of himself. But not just in suffering, but even in times of plenty and joy, he's doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. He's bringing about for his own glory. So when we marry these things together, what we really see is life. We can say, life is all about suffering, or life is all about, trying to get ahead and then we die. Or we can say life is really all about God's going to be receiving glory, and it's not necessarily what happens to us, it's how we respond to it. That has a large part to do with our tragedy and our suffering. And when we're guiding our children, there's going to be places that are default. Whenever we go through hard times, we tend to do a couple things, right? And I think this is, if you're going through it, look for these things in your kids. I think the first thing we're going to see is just checking out. Like our students, they're going to try to check out. This is where you start seeing a lot more time on TikTok, Netflix, in front of a screen oftentimes. Sometimes we numb it out. A lot of times that's through substance abuse. That could be through exercising. I mean, I've seen people numb out, hardships through going to something that looks healthy, but it is healthy, but it's coming from an unhealthy place. And then we have so you check out, you got the numb out, and then you got the ones who blow up. Right? They just introvert, take it all in, and explode. Right? And these are all things that we see patterns in pain when we are not taking the time to sit in the pain and taking time to process through the pain, because we have to get it out. And like we said, sometimes you might need to go to a pastor, sometimes you might need to go to a counselor. What I've learned is misery loves company, right? And sometimes I'm going to be talking about it. And sometimes the place I need to vomit my suffer needs to be a place with a door and four walls. I can just say the things. And sometimes the best place for that is a counselor. Mm-hmm. So that being said, as we continue down this, I would be amiss, and I think we would do a service, and we probably would get a couple emails and some text if we didn't say that our first line of defense in suffering is prayer. Mm-hmm. It really is, because we are communicating to the one who understands why. It's how much I get IKEA furniture. I try to put it together without the little picture thing sometimes.
Yeah, that's risky.
There's this big Kallax stand. They're the big ones with all the cubes.
Oh yes.
I put one of those together one time and put half the shelves in upside down.
Uh-oh.
So like the particle, whatever's showing, I had to go back and take the whole thing apart. That was my own induced suffering. But it was like, if I would have just consulted, the manual or whatever first, instead of trying to suck it up. So, when it comes to going through suffering and through tragedy, or just getting the answer no to our prayers, we should lean into prayer. Prayer for our kids, first of all, on a daily. Get the jump on it. Don't wait till the bad thing happens, and then pray with our kids. That's real important, because they're learning from us. And also, especially if you're hurting alongside of them, them seeing you cry out to the Lord in pain, I mean, that does so much, because it's like this person is just as human as I am.
Yeah, I am a big, and just from things we've talked about in the past, I think it's so important that as parents that we are transparent and real with our kids. They need to see us hurt. They need to see us when we don't know. They need to see us when we need to apologize. All of those come from the same thing, which is that we're modeling for them healthy behavior. Hopefully what we're modeling is healthy behavior. But if we have this incorrect, notion that we have to look like we have it all together for our children, because that's where the parent, what we're teaching them, we're showing and modeling an unrealistic expectation for them that they really can't rise to and meet, because that's not real. And then, you're kind of setting them up to then question their own selves later with, well, why can't I handle this the way my parents did? My dad never, he was always certain, or he was never this. My parents never apologized, so I don't apologize, or, whatever. And so I think that's important, to let them see your pain, let them see. I mean, it doesn't mean that we have to bear every little thing with them. I mean, obviously, but we teach them how to hurt and grieve, and we show them how to lean into Christ.
And there are different ways to do it at different ages, right?
Right,
so
right.
You would interact with a 4-year-old different than a 12-year-old than a 14-year-old. But yeah, being able to bring them into that and helping them to understand how to deal with their own emotions, how to deal with other people's emotions, how to deal with things that happen to them that are their fault, that aren't their fault. And being able to face that, coming back to the truth, coming back to other people, letting them see you go to your community, whether that's formally through a pastor or a counselor, informally through friends. All of those things are I think, extremely critical in building a healthy family and a healthy set of relationships that lead you into a better life, quite frankly.
Which does bring the role in parenting to the forefront. I know a lot of parenting is teaching our children to be wise so they can avoid a lot of the self-induced suffering in the world. But also, we know from Scripture that suffering is part of how God grows us. So yes, we want to teach them to be wise with their money so they don't have to suffer because of self-induced money management, but some suffering is just going to come. Some trials are going to come. And then I would encourage anyone listening to name one person who you respect who hasn't had to go through a crazy trial. I can't name one. One person who you genuinely respect and were like, I would love for my child to grow up and have these qualities, or even me, who hasn't gone through a level of hurt or pain. That's part of what builds us. So parents
That's part of what those stories are. I mean, most of those stories, when you look at those stories, whether they're fictional or non-fictional, there's a journey, there's a trial, there's something that's overcome that those people, rise beyond. Well,
and seeing how people that you respect and people that you look up to, or people that this person is someone, that is, follows Christ with everything that they can, seeing how they work their way through tragedy helps you find comfort in knowing this person was able to make it through. When it hits me, I can make it through.
And that's a great thing to bring to your family. Hey, this person's been through this. Look, maybe we need to talk to them, or maybe just look at their story. Look at how they responded. There's godly examples out there. I know when I was going through probably the darkest place of my life, I was 24, and I went to a conference, and there's this pastor speaking, and it was one of those. It hadn't happened that much, but if no one else was there, could have been just me. I mean, I was in the middle of it, and then he says, "Let me ask you something. How much has your pain cost you? How much does it cost you?" And it's cost me my reputation. It's cost me money. It's cost a lot, more than anything. He goes, "Well, if it costs you so much, why don't you use it?" Anything, no one buys something costly and hides it in a closet. They at least put it on display so someone comes, or they use it. And that's really the full redemptive purpose that we would hope to see our children. I want my child to get to, that when they go through the thing, that on the other side of the thing, that God can use it. If it costs them so much heartache, so much trial, then use it. And my job at that point isn't isn't to prevent the suffering because it's already there, the tragic. My charge then is to guide them in it, point them in the direction of where they can go to best utilize that. So I went through a really bad thing when I was 24, right? I'm sitting and God says, use it. Okay, God, I don't know how I'm going to use that, right? Well, one day I'm in upstate South Carolina, 2 hours away from where I was living. I'm sitting at a football field on a Saturday at like 3 because I was hanging out with a marching band. That's always fun. And
Hey, I grew up in a marching band.
hey,
It is fun.
marching band, they're hardcore. But like, I'm sitting there just watching by myself this person who I don't know. I've never met him. Haven't met him since. Comes up to me and say, "You're a pastor," and I was like, "Well, sort of."
Sort of.
And they said, "Hey, this just happened to me. Can I talk to you?" It was the same situation.
Wow.
I was like, well, I know why I'm up here in, upstate South Carolina today.
Yeah.
And because someone told me, use it, whenever that situation happened, that was already in my head. Use it. It wasn't something I invented. It wasn't me being clever. It wasn't me. It's something that was discipled into me. And my encouragement was, when you're walking your kid through the tragedy and you're allowing them to feel it and you have them in community and they have a foundation of faith and you have the open communication and the safe place and some of the perspective has started to creep in, that's when you lean in and you say, okay, let's talk about the future of this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what it's done to you or to us as a family, and let's talk about how we're going to use that.
And that's a process in and of itself to get to that point. In the first day that the thing happens to you, whatever the thing is, you're not in that place.
No.
Yeah, and even if you intellectually know, and there's been times in my life where I know the answer. I'm not ready for the answer yet. And sometimes I have to go through that. And that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Sometimes it's that community. It's like, I know the answer. I don't need you to tell me. I just need you to be with me for a little bit. Tomorrow, the next day, maybe the day after that. That's when I'll be able to take action on that. For now, I just need to survive.
Yeah.
Right. I just need to be able to get through this for a little bit.
Yeah, because like you said, knowledge isn't everything. If I'm not healthy enough to receive that knowledge, or And I mean, honestly, this is what a lot of godly mentors do, godly counselors. They don't just tell you the thing. They want you to get it. Yeah. Now kudos to those who realize you need a little nudge and I need to say the thing. Sometimes because if we don't help, if we don't ourselves move through hurt, or if we don't help others move through hurt, we end up getting sucked into it like the Bermuda Triangle, right? Where we just get lost in it. And then you meet somebody and within 5 minutes, you know about this hurt, which is okay. But then the next time you meet them, within 5 minutes, it's coming up again. And the next time people are starting to avoid them because that's the person who's identified by your hurt. Yeah. And my encouragement as we kind of sign off today is our kids are going to go through hurt. You're going to go through hurt. We're all been through it. But may on the other side, we not be identified by the hurt.
Yeah.
Maybe we be identified by the healing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just looking at, Romans chapter 5, verse 3, we rejoice in our sufferings, which is hard to do, right? We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame. And so, thinking about what you just said, if we want to be able to live as people without shame because we're behaving properly, if we want to have hope, if we want to be people of character, well, you get there through enduring suffering, right? You that chain, if you want to get to the end of that chain, you start at the beginning of it, and you've got to work through that. And that, I think, is an encouraging thought.
Yeah. So all that to be said, we want to encourage you, suffer well. Suffer well, whatever it is. I know a lot of times we go here, we try to be encouraging, but it's like, hopefully this is encouraging in its own way. But yeah, we want to be people who are known by how we've been healed, than more so than how we've been hurt. So that's our encouragement, and that's going to be our prayer for you this week. We hope to see you back again soon. I'm Delmar.
I'm Robert.
And I'm April.
And we hope that you are living in